So, welcome to the Raise. I'm your host, Jade, and I'm really excited to be here today with our guest, Emilie Faure, who's the founder of Juniver, which is a platform that provides science-based recovery programs for disordered eating to help people reduce their urges and get back to living their everyday lives. So today we'll be talking about the funding round that Emilie and her team closed last year, their pre-seed round, and their experiences of raising in this climate, which we know can be tough right now. So Emilie, welcome and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jade. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's really exciting. Also because Juniver is doing something really amazing in an area that, lots of people are familiar with, but don't know much about in terms of how to help people. So, it'd be great if you could start by telling us a bit about your background and why you started Juniver.
Yeah. I grew up in a number of different countries. My parents were journalists, so we traveled quite a bit and lived in various places, which honed a sense of, a desire for adventure, but also a sense of adaptability. I really had to adapt to different circumstances and learn from my environment pretty quickly, which has proven to be a valuable asset now that I'm running Juniver. The company is very very close to my heart. I struggled with an eating disorder for quite a long time, and like many, didn't access care for a long time. And then when I did, I found that it wasn't as useful as it could have been. And that's really because our point of view is that it's rarely in a therapist appointment that you have a problem if you have an eating disorder. It's every moment around that appointment. So therapy is very valuable, and we certainly advocate seeking help of that nature if you need it. However, we also know that eating disorders are a brain disorder, and so they manifest as a compulsive condition. And that means the urges, which are characteristic across all eating disorders, urges manifest anytime, anywhere. So we developed a solution that could really help people overcome urges when they presented. So that was really the foundational piece of Juniver. And looking at my background, I spent some time in the art world, which was fantastic in many regards. I was able to work at an agency, a photographer's agency, and then moved on to White Cube Gallery and Sotheby's. And in those roles was able to work with artists, a talent, and really, help that group of artists or that group of creatives really, make great work. And then on the other hand, was in sales roles in those settings, and so had to sell the work of those artists to a number of different clients. And so found that to be a very good learning experience in doing both of those things and learning how to hone those skills, building really that that talent pool and recruiting new talent, as well as really that outward facing role of attracting funding and closing deals. And when I started to think about Juniver and a digital solution for eating disorders, what that could look like, I, worked with a number of people that I had come across in my own journey with clinicians, spoke to people who became members, people I had met in my journey who were struggling with eating disorders. And when that drumbeat of starting a company became too loud, left my role at Sotheby's and started Juniver in a full-time way. So that's a little bit of my background, and as I think you'll probably notice in many of the health tech, in much of the health tech space, especially in women's health, founders are often patient founders, and I think that means a real connection to the mission, but also a strong understanding of the member, the user, and that experience. So what navigating an eating disorder and eventually recovering gave me was insights into certainly the experience of having one, but also experience in the treatment modalities and in in this space of eating disorders, it's problematic in some ways, by many ways, because there's limited access and certainly low efficacy. So the gold standard treatment for eating disorders is only 30% effective. So really room for improvement there. And again, that background, that lived experience, I think was particularly valuable in really laying out the foundation of Juniver as a differentiated offering.
Yeah, and I mean, I often find it's really amazing when founders build something that they would have wanted to have. It's like, how can I change the world and create a space that I would have loved to have lived in when I had this problem? And like you said, that allows them to go on and build something that's really exceptional, because I hadn't actually thought, oh, at what point do people need help when they have an eating disorder or they suffer from disordered eating? And like you said, that comes from those moments where they have those urges that they feel that they can't control. So I feel like that's not only a really unique way of trying to solve and serve this group of people, but it also speaks very loudly to the fact that you'd experienced it and have that understanding that many people don't.
That's right.
So I mean, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and also amazing to hear that you were at Sotheby's. I mean, that could probably be a whole conversation of its own, but it sounds like a lot of the experience that you had from sales has gone on to serve you really well with fundraising as well. And I mentioned earlier you closed your pre-seed round last summer. So what was your experience pitching in that climate?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot in that first round. We'd raised a smaller angel round prior to that, really with the objective of building out an MVP and getting some data around a pilot program of Juniver. So we raised angel funding 6 months prior to the pre-seed round. We're able to run a 4-week pilot program and get some data from that, and then raised that pre-seed round we got our first check in March or April.
Wow.
What we found is that the problem of eating disorders, and this is again true for many conditions that either disproportionately affect women or exclusively affect women, they're often misunderstood. And so we spent a part of our early days fundraising coming to realize we need to shift the narrative so that there's a lot more education about eating disorders at the beginning of the pitch. So we leaned into explaining to investors it's 1 in 2 who struggle with an eating disorder today, and eating disorders are invisible for the majority of cases. So the typical anorexic patient, who's usually white, young, female, and very emaciated, that patient is only 6% of the eating disorder population. So the majority struggle with another form of eating disorder and live in bodies that are of all shapes and sizes, including quote unquote healthy sizes. So we spent the early days really advocating on, this is our solution, this is why it's important, and then pivoted to a pitch that was much more about, this is the problem and this is what you need to know about it before venturing into the solution. So that was our learning. In terms of the climate, I think it's I'm going to answer perhaps from the specific point of view of a women's health company, or a health company that tackles a problem that disproportionately affects women, although it doesn't exclusively affect them. 25% of our users are men. We see that there's and we've become very quite vocal about this. There's a real need for diversity amongst investors, because we know that diversity in the investor base will mean diverse innovation, and we have a cap table that is majority female by far, and we know that inherent biases, which are completely natural, right? You and I have them. We see the world through our eyes. It means that, broadly speaking, investors will tend to invest in problems that they that they know, that they either experience themselves or that they can see a big need for a solution. And with eating disorders, that's not an obvious bet for someone who hasn't been touched by an eating disorder or thought about it much before. So we eventually also became very strategic, not just about the storytelling, but who we were talking to, and focusing on firms that had a diverse group of investors in decision-making roles.
Okay, now that makes sense. And I think it must be really challenging when, again, like you said, the challenges that people face when they experience disordered eating, that's very invisible. You can't look at somebody and say whether you do or don't know. And what often helps is investors or people who understand, because it's either their own lived experience or they've seen that in like maybe family or friends or people they know. And so I think that when you have a product like yours, it can be really challenging to find the right people to pitch to, because you won't necessarily walk in a room and think, they're going to get it.
Right, right. And that's on, I think the more equipped you are to handle that, the better. And so it really comes with being prepared to show proof points. And so it's proof points about the market and, what is the opportunity? So the size of the problem, but also, the lack of competition, which is maybe a silver lining of this problem we're talking about, where if there is limited investment in your space, then maybe there's limited competition. So there's the opportunity for, to be first mover. And so that can be exciting and part of your pitch. And so looking at that and then coming with as much data about your solution as possible. Now in the early days, it's perhaps difficult to get that, but really focusing on, okay, what is the MVP going to look like, that minimal viable product? What is the most nimble version of what I ultimately want to build? What is that going to look like? And how can I prove out with a group of users that there is potential? And so that's what we focused on prior to the raise, which helped us and led to conviction building.
That's amazing. And it also, one of the big things that founders struggle with is the fact that fundraising is a full-time thing, or at least that's how it's presented a lot of the time. And you had a small team when you were fundraising, and so there's obviously lots of things to juggle. You can't spend 8 of your 10 hours of the day speaking to investors. So how did you balance fundraising with building the business and being there for your team?
Yeah, we indeed had a very small team at the time. We were 2, and we had great hands-on advisors. So I will add that they were our advisors played a really crucial role because they were so involved in, again, showing the potential of Juniver, speaking about their own industry experience and the opportunity. So we had a great group of investors, but in terms of the team, we were 2 full-time and then had some freelancers, for example, a designer who helped with our MVP. So it's certainly important to be realistic when going out to fundraise, and also to make it as efficient as possible. And so you really need to go into it very prepared and ready to answer the questions and the asks that investors will put your way, but also be very specific about how you're running your meetings and who you're reaching out to. So this eventually came, I think in the beginning, we were really taking calls with as many people as possible to hone our pitch and to get better at presenting. But we also quite quickly moved to looking at our list and really targeting investors that were deploying. So this was something we would vet up front. Are they, are they still fundraising their own fund? Are they waiting for first close in order to deploy? So these questions about where are they in their own fundraising journey? Because of course investors are fundraising too, and are they ready to invest? And then what is their check size? What is their area of focus? All of the due diligence that is really, and now there's so much of this online. These websites are these funds websites are very detailed, and that's helpful because you can then say, okay, I have this week 10 funds to talk to that fit that invest in my broader space, and that are actively deploying. Now, in the time when we were raising our pre-seed, this actually wasn't the case. A lot of funds were not deploying. So we really had to ask those questions up front. But it proved valuable because it meant that the meetings we did do tended to progress to a second meeting, or lead to a no, but at least you got a quick answer, which we can talk about as valuable. But it's important to you almost want to push for that quick no rather than wait for it to come 5 meetings down the line.
Yeah. I think also a quick no is also better than a very long yes as well, when you feel that you're sitting in that space of uncertainty.
You want the yes. So I would qualify that by saying, I want the yes over a quick no, but indeed some slow yeses can be can be maybe frustrating. Again, I think in the early days, especially from an investor point of view, there's more risk than ever, possibly more upside, but there's you're having to sell your idea and your team versus really any data or much data.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. Like you say, they're trying to mitigate risk as well, so it goes both ways. But one thing that quite a few founders find, especially female founders, is that there are often times that they're presented with questions that highlight that risk versus like the opportunity. So how do you, or how have you used those instances as a chance to spin away from purely speaking of the risk and present the size of the opportunity within the market?
Yeah, and research shows that this is not just this is also female investors. So it's really female founders who are on the receiving end of those questions about risk mitigation versus the opportunity. And so we heard it from everyone, and it's important to answer. I think it's a legitimate question, but you do want to indeed pivot away from that pretty swiftly within your answer so that you can talk about what your male founder colleagues are getting as questions, which is more about, tell me more about what you're excited at, in this opportunity and in this space. So have that, that language, those numbers really ready. What is the size of the opportunity? What in the case of eating disorders, it's a $66 billion market in the US alone. So what speaking those numbers, saying 1 in 10, those are figures that resonate, that land, and I think they are good to have up your sleeve when you're asked about, well, how do you deal with this problem that we foresee happening? Being able to gracefully pivot is something that takes a little bit of practice, that you can certainly practice on friends, on other founders, ask them what kind of questions they've received and how they've handled it. But that would be my recommendation is practice that pivot and know what your numbers are, so that you can indeed show that size and generate some excitement.
Yeah, and I think also being able to actually share with investors, I can see that is a risk, but I'm not dismissing that. But actually, on the flip side, here's the upside of what what has the potential to happen. And also just the way that you can also communicate that excitement, because I feel like when people are talking about risk, that's not a very exciting thing. And even like your tone of voice, your facial expression can really change versus when you're speaking about all of the amazing things that have the potential to happen.
Yeah, and you also have to hold in mind, it's not just about the idea that you're sharing. It's what the investor is accountable to vis-a-vis their LPs. So they need that big opportunity. They can't invest in businesses that are lifestyle companies. So you need to really show and prove and continuously show and prove that there is potential there of a meaningful scale.
100%. And earlier you mentioned something that I think is really important, which is the process of like vetting investors. So what are some of the core questions that you think founders should either be asking investors once they're on the call, or information they should be trying to gather before they even reach out to investors in the first place?
Yeah, so I would do my due diligence on the fund's website about, do they invest broadly in your space? What is, if they only invest in SaaS products, B2B, it wouldn't be a fit for us, for example. You also want to understand their fund thesis, and some can be very specific. So that's either to inform whether or not you reach out to them, and also to color your pitch potentially. You also want to know how large their fund is and whether they've deployed out of it yet. So many investors are, as we discussed, raising and possibly doing it while you're fundraising as well. So where they are in that fund close, are they deploying, is important, are important questions to ask. And then whether or not they reserve for follow-ons, that's a question that we tend to ask, just because you do want to hopefully have an investor that's going to continue on the journey, at least until the next round. And then the size of checks, and that's important because in some cases, especially if you're early stage and if you're pre-seed, all the more so, check sizes may be more than what you actually are out to raise. So looking at the check size is also an important data point. And then on the call, most of these questions can be answered on in your own time during your research. I also ask a few questions up front on the call, and that's to kind of position my pitch according to what the answers are. And so if you want to ask them, for example, the criteria that they use when deciding to invest, that could be information you use while pitching. What do you want to lean into, and where do you want to maybe spend a little bit less time? And then describing the process and timeline. So when you're on the call and the call is progressing well or regardless, asking about what their process is and timeline helps you hold them to it if the conversation does progress. You also have, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing.
You also have the opportunity to see, okay, if it's not a fit in that early exchange of Q&A, if it's not quite a fit for now, you can pitch and present it as the opportunity to showcase what you're doing now, and then speak to what you're going towards and what you're going towards for the next round that they may be a fit for. So I wouldn't lose the opportunity to involve them in your journey and keep them warm in between that first meeting, which is not going to be an investment, but between that meeting and your next fundraise. And then if it's not a fit, there are two ways out in a way. One is to really focus the conversation around people that they might want you to, or that you might want to get an introduction to. So is there anybody, okay, it's not a fit for them, who do they recommend you talk to? So using that time to really expand your network and to get some insights into who else is not maybe on your outreach list. And then the other way to handle the early realization in that call that it might not be a fit is to say, I'm realizing we're probably not a fit right now. It's probably makes sense for us to hold off on the meeting, and thank you very much for your time. There's value in that, especially if we think about the time on a call, half an hour, the energy it takes. You want to protect your time, you want to protect your energy when you're in fundraise mode. So it's a solution that it's something I've done a few times.
No, those are all really great things for people to remember, to take into consideration, because like you said, it's really important to not just protect your time, but fundraising can feel quite draining. So when you're constantly in those conversations, and if you go through 5, 6, 7 of them, it's like this was not a good use of time because they weren't a good fit. If you can do that work up front to save yourself from feeling that way, it can reduce the almost like the emotional fatigue that fundraising causes.
Absolutely.
And on that, how did you decide, once you kind of vetted investors, you had initial calls with them, how did you decide whether you wanted a second call? Because it's not just about what they're interested in. It can be, okay, I do, I don't, once you've had that first touch point with them.
I would say it's rare that they would want a second meeting and you wouldn't. You probably both on that first meeting is usually the opportunity to realize, oh, it's not a fit, and there's probably synchronicity in that realization. With a second meeting, it means that the first meeting went well, and that probably means that you're up for a second meeting because you're fundraising, they want you, you've vetted that it's a match in terms of check size, et cetera. So I don't see that necessarily occurring that frequently. Now, if there is perhaps a scenario where they're information gathering because they're looking to place a bet in your space, you can maybe understand that on that second call. Yeah, I think those scenarios would be rare.
Okay, no, that's fair, and it feels like you said, you have that chance to get to that point on the first call, so that all parties don't walk away feeling too drained.
Yeah, I think, and make it that objective for that first call is you go into a fundraise meeting wanting to progress it, or wanting that quick no and as quick as possible in that first meeting. But if the investor who's looked at your company by that point through a deck in this call, it wants to progress it, probably does mean that there's a fit. And so I would make that second call as productive as possible and lead to hopefully the next stage.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And you mentioned this a few times now about the information and the data that you had to share. And a lot of that was like part of the storytelling, but it gets to a point where you get further down those conversations where investors are talking about, wanting to see your data and a data room. So what information should founders really have at their fingertips to share with investors, whether it's through conversations or in their data room once it gets to that stage?
Yeah, after a first meeting and after every meeting, in fact, there's usually questions that come over email. And what I found to be really helpful is to have an FAQ in my data room. So in the data room, before we go on the FAQ, the basic elements to include are information about your team. We have our deck. We have our competitor analysis. We have our demo. So we have the Juniver product currently is an app. So we have a short demo of the app so that people don't have to go through the experience and the onboarding, et cetera, to make it really sharp and short. And then we have the link to download the app where they'll have a free trial to test it out. And then we have also the research backing our program. So in our case, it's very important to show that while it's highly innovative and unique, it is grounded in not just robust research, but the latest research in behavioral science. So we have a whole section of our data room focused on the research underpinning Juniver and also the research around the broader market. So eating disorders are a fast-growing problem. So you have the headers be the point that the research is backing, the articles are backing, and then you have the supporting evidence. So we have quite a thorough amount of quite a meaningful amount of research in our data room specific to our solution. And then, as I mentioned, this FAQ section, and that's really because you'll find that some of the questions come up in a different form, but they're pretty much trying to get to the same point. You'll want to address the questions that come up recurringly. You want to put them in your deck eventually so that you're really preempting those questions from coming up. If questions coming up more than twice, there's value in considering putting it somewhere visible up front. But if it's questions that are deeper into the business, not something that you would share at the pitch level, but that are consistently coming up when it's early stages of due diligence, then I would put that in an FAQ, and you'll find that then investors are getting their questions answered. They might have asked it in a slightly different way, but essentially they're getting the information they need. So it does limit that time-consuming process of having to offer tailored answers to what are overlapping questions.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that was something that I didn't realize probably until I'd had about maybe 15, 20 calls of investors. I was like, oh, there's about 3 or 4 questions that keep coming up over and over again. And I feel like a broken record.
Yeah.
Or it's like, I feel like, oh, I said it perfectly in that instance, but I haven't documented it somewhere so that I can learn that and repeat it. So yeah, I would love to have had that advice before I started when I was fundraising like earlier this year, but that's really true. You will get those questions that just come up time and time again.
That's right.
And in terms of like how people should be presenting that data and that information, do you recommend any particular format or systems or tools that founders can use?
Yeah, so we use Notion for a lot of things, but for the data room as well. And if you share it with an investor, you can see whether they visited. So it informs also, how you take the second call, how much information they've come into it with. And then it's also easy to edit. You can plug things in, pull them out. You can tailor it. I duplicate a page and then I'll tailor it to a specific investor if they've had specific requests. On the financial model, we don't share that up front. So we have a section for the financial model and then a line around them, inviting the person reading the page to contact me, and then I'll walk through that on a call. I think for a financial model, it's important to give some context, so we do that typically on a call. And the other thing we use Notion for that's investor related is our investor updates. So I'll put everything on a Notion page, and it allows you to also add some visuals if we've done. If we were on stage at an event or we sponsored a booth at some conference, whatever it may be, we'll put some visuals there, and that's helpful versus an email. And then again, you can keep it as a record, so you refer back to it next time you send an update. But we also you can edit it if you realize there's an update that's missed. You add it on, and then readers can find it there.
Okay, no, that's really good to know here. I hadn't thought about using Notion, although I use it for many other things. I hadn't thought about using it for a data room. And there's also like lots of different applications that you can plug and play into Notion as well. So that must be super useful.
It looks like a web page on the receiving end, and on the back, it's really easy to. It's not even building. You're really curating the representation, the snapshot of your company, and so it's easy to do and to produce. And then on the receiving end, it does look polished.
Yeah, no, I love that. And for those who are listening, don't worry, we will add links to anything that's mentioned, so you don't have to go searching for it yourself. But saying that, one of the things that I know a lot of founders feel quite apprehensive about is sharing too much data with people that they don't really know. So how can founders be sure to protect the data and information that they are sharing with investors when they do create things like a data room?
I think we tend to want to protect the information that's close to us, and that doesn't always do justice to the business and to our efforts. So that's a consideration, is really look at, is it something that you are protecting for legitimate reasons, or is it something you're very attached to because you've spent a lot of time working on it, it's your idea, it's your baby. But part of the fundraising exercise is to enter into a conversation with someone who is, it's trust building. And so I think coming at it with a sense of, okay, I've vetted, so there's some vetting that has to occur at the beginning. So we never share a data room with somebody we haven't met over a video call at least. But that, having done that, having met that person on a video call, and by extension, their colleagues at the fund. I don't need to meet everyone on the team, but to have met the fund in a call, in a video call, if that's been done and you feel like it's a conversation that is going to progress into a possible investment, then I would look at what your reservations are and whether they're founded. And in some cases they are. Biotech companies have many more reasons to protect information than a company like ours. Whilst there's a huge amount of work and R&D that went into it, and it's very innovative, it's also it's a business that doesn't have the kind of IP that you would have in biotech. So looking at your reservations and really entering, having vetted someone, entering that phase of due diligence with the intention of trust building, I think is important. And conversely, expect your competitors to see your deck. I think there's also things do get shared. We use DocSend for our deck, and that does protect access to a certain degree. You need to enter an email if you choose that feature. You need to enter an email to access the deck, so it does avoid the attachment being sent widely. But I think those would be the considerations I would offer up. One is vet who you're giving access to in at least a brief call, and then if you believe that there's a potential fit, that it's an investor who's serious about your business, then information in a data room is something to be comfortable sharing. And then the final third piece would be, that said, things do get shared beyond the scope of who you intended it to go to. So just weigh that up as well. And it hopefully what's quite obvious to everyone is, when you vet an investor, when you look at an investor, look at their portfolio company, their portfolio companies, and if they have a company that's very similar to yours, or that tackles the same problem, they're unlikely to invest. It's a conflict of interest, and so they can, I wouldn't progress a call with an investor, nor would they. I think the investor typically will volunteer that anyway, but that wouldn't be a fit.
Yeah, no, that's also the importance of doing a bit of your own due diligence before you reach out, to make sure that you're not going for, like you said, investors that have already put money into a similar platform or a similar service or product, whatever it is that you're building. So that's really good to take into consideration. I feel that there's a lot of hesitancy around sharing, and I'm not sure what it stems from, but there is like a sense of distrust or mistrust between founders and investors, and I'm not sure where it comes from. But I've had a few conversations with founders that are like, oh, I want to share some information, but not until we've gotten to this stage, and I'm not sure if that helps or hinders the chance of progressing to that stage.
Right, exactly. And that's something to weigh up. And I also think we are very attached to ideas, but ultimately it's execution that makes a difference. So your idea is to those listening, your idea is probably great, but has been thought before. And so it's really about proving that you are the right person to execute on it. And that's where the value of the due diligence comes in, and where information is important.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's already important things for founders to remember. And saying that, another thing that often comes up is like that it feels like there can be a bit of a power imbalance between investors and founders, especially when, the process of fundraising, like founders are vulnerable because they need that capital. Either we're kind of like in a day and age where people feel like they're running short of runway, or they need more than they thought they would have in the previous round. So it can sometimes feel like founders are on the receiving end of a lot of demands. So at what point in those conversations should founders be like, okay, actually this is taking up too much of my time, respectfully, so that they don't risk damaging that relationship with an investor as well.
And these are existing investors?
I'd say either existing or investors that they're thinking of coming in.
Yeah. So if you need more runway and you're focused, I think if make a decision about whether or not you're fundraising. And if you are, it would be the same process. You would really want to be quite strategic about who you're reaching out to, do your due diligence, and then ask questions on the call quite early on in order to eliminate people who wouldn't be investing. And then the second part of that are existing investors, and that can be, especially if you're raising early and you're raising with angels, you could be taking in smaller checks, and it means you might have more investors on your cap table than you would at a later stage, or that you would in a different round. So what we found useful to do, and it took a bit of trial and error, but we're happy with where we landed. We do a 1 hour, it's actually 45 minutes, a 45-minute video call every month. It's on the first Tuesday of the month. And that's for our investors and advisors, actually. And it's open. So it's open to those people. So whoever wants to join can join. And they listen to a short presentation I give about company updates in the month that's gone by. And then we have a topic of conversation. So there'll typically be a top of mind topic in the company that we're focused on at that time. And so I'll invite contributions from the group about how to tackle it. And it's really been valuable, I think, from the two sides. Investors get an update. They also have the opportunity to ask questions. So in terms of efficiency, that's really been valuable for us. Instead of having investors send ad hoc emails about things that they want feedback on, they want information about what they have an idea they want to share, or they want information about a choice we've made. So it helps group those questions, and again, to the same point as the FAQ in the data room, it helps kind of understand others hear an answer that they might have posed over email to you separately. So there's value in the efficiency of it, and then there's also value because some of our angels came through syndicates, and so and I had one-on-one calls with a few of them, and found that they were wonderfully resourceful about a lot of things that we could use or needed, or that they contributed voluntarily to the business. And so it was a way to also get people that I didn't have a direct relationship with initially, to get them more involved in Juniver, and to certainly tap into that great network that I might not have otherwise reached out to. The investor updates that we also send, we send those over email. So it's a link to a Notion page that we put together. That's on a quarterly basis. So we invest quite a bit of time into those updates. And then we send a version of that to prospective investors. So we're preparing for a raise in Q4, and we send a version of our investor updates that's more high level to investors that we've kept warm, that we know could be potential investors for the next round.
Okay, no, that's all really, really great advice. And I think sometimes it can feel more difficult than you want it to feel in those moments. Just like, I want to give information, but I also have to protect our time, make sure it's a good use of time as a founder and as a team. So yeah, like I said, for all who are watching, make notes, or listening, sorry, make notes. It's good to be able to refer back to these things when you're in the moment. But last question, if you could go back and do it all again, would you do anything differently?
everything was a learning opportunity. So in a way, we wouldn't be here without having gone through the steps that we went through. I would probably accelerate the iterations on the storytelling to lean into that education at the beginning. I would probably also do that strategic elimination process of who to reach out to earlier in the process.
Mm.
Eventually, though, there's also value in some of the spontaneous calls we took. We were introduced to many people in a way that we hadn't expected from people we didn't have on our radar. So there's also, while you want to be hyper focused, there are also unexpected and positive outcomes that can come out of a conversation you're having with an investor that doesn't invest in your space, doesn't the right check,
Mm.
that they're really, turns out they've had an eating disorder, and they really want to promote your business to their network. So I'm not, I don't have a very specific answer to your question, because in a way, there was value in even that slower process in the beginning. For the fundraise coming up, we have people in our network who are potential investors for the seed round and who weren't a fit in the pre-seed, but we met them anyway. And so in a way, it
Oh,
was an opportunity to make the second round more efficient, to take the time to make these, to have these calls earlier on.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's all like really good to know and hear, because I feel like people beat themselves up and like, oh, why didn't I do that better this time around? But like you said, it's a learning opportunity, and often you will make many mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think you build this, you have to look forward. There's also you learn fast, is really, I think the one piece of advice I would give people is you'll make mistakes, absolutely. Learn from them quickly and then move on and look ahead. And so maybe
Yeah.
my lack of an answer on that question is because I've trained myself to really think about, okay, whatever mistakes I made, I'm sure there were plenty that I'm misremembering
Mm.
or potentially don't have on my radar anymore. But you pivot as quickly as possible. So be it at the micro level of, tweaking a deck design to what amount do you want to raise at your next round? You think, make that change from that mistake, and then really look at what's next.
No, that agree. Have a thick skin and a short-term memory. I think it's like one of the best attitudes to come out when it comes to fundraising.
Yeah, and don't
Thank
take it personally. There's also, it's not personal. So move on. You will expect plenty of no's, though. It's a numbers game to a certain extent. So you want to
you.
get the no's out of the way so you can get to the yes.
Yeah, and also the no's will teach you something that will inevitably help you to get to the
Yeah,
yes, because some, not all, but some investors are actually quite good at giving feedback afterwards
yeah,
to
yeah,
give you a heads up about, actually you might want to do this, this, and this better.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so no, that's all really great to know, and thank you so much, Emily, for coming on and having a chat with us today. That's all of our questions, and an hour has gone by super quick. Um,
Thank you so
so
much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
no, it's been really lovely chatting to you, and thank you to everybody who's been listening. So you've made it all the way to the end. Thank you for joining us, and like if you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, but also share with other founders that you know could benefit, whether it's people who you know are knees deep in fundraising or people who are thinking about fundraising in the next few months. Make sure you share it with them, because that's what we're here for. We're here to share the knowledge and the wisdom from people who've been there, done it, and worn the t-shirt. So,
And if I may add, we are recruiting for a clinical trial at the moment, and you can sign up at junivertrial.com.
amazing. Well, we'll leave the link for that in our newsletter and the description as well. So for all of those who are interested in taking part, the link is there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jade.
No worries. Well, we'll see you all on the next episode.
Take care. Bye.